come on back together. So I think that I copied these numbers from one table, and I think that other tables are getting the same kind of circles. So I don't think that this process is hard. I think there's a lot of details in it. It's really easy to lose track of how many votes does this person have and how many votes do we have all together so far. Is that enough to meet the quota? So just be really careful when you do this kind of thing on a test. And then once you've got all the circles, the rest is pretty straightforward, but you got to make sure you do the rest. So doing the rest is the part where we find our fractions. So what we'll do is figure out how many times each player is circled. And if you count all the P1s that are circled, how many do you get? You get 18. How many times is P2 circled? Just twice. P3, also just twice. P4, just twice. And again, we want fractions or percentages. So make sure on the test you don't stop at 18, 2, 2, and 2. We need to divide. And how much do we divide by? 24, because yeah, this is Patty's formula up here. There's 24 different ways to order these 4 people. So you're going to divide by 24 every time you do one of these things with 4 people. Another way to see the 24, and actually maybe a way to check to make sure you haven't made any mistakes, is go ahead and add up the 2, the 2, the 2, and the 18. If you don't get 24, you've made a mistake somewhere. Right? It's got to be 24. Grace? Patty said that the way to figure out how many ways there are to order people, if you have, for example, 4 people, you say, okay, I'm going to do 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And that is 24. I think what Patty was just saying, so Patty, did you, were you? Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, so just counting these to get 24. Okay, and then if you prefer percentages, you can make these percentages 18 out of 24, that's 75%. And then this is about 8, 8, and 8. So this is how the power is distributed in this example. 75% for the first person, 8%, 8%, 8%. These ones don't add up to 100 because I rounded. It should have been like 8. No, remember you had overcounted. There was a P4 you had circled that should have been the P1, so that's a 2. So there's a little bit of rounding, otherwise it would add up to 100. These add up to 99, it's okay. You know, I mean, I think there's information to be gained from looking at those percentages. If you looked at the 4, the 2, the 1, and the 1, okay, I have no problem seeing that the 1 and the 1 have the same amount of power, and it's not much. But what's the big surprise? Which one of these numbers is the surprise? That's exactly it. Is that not surprising? Player 2 has 2 votes. Player 2 has twice as many votes as player 3 or player 4. And it seems like player 2 should be as powerful as players 3 and 4 together, because player 2 has 2 votes and the last 2 folks combined have 2 votes. But it turns out they each have exactly the same amount of power using this calculation. So you get these kind of counterintuitive results. Like, you can't just look at the numbers in the beginning and say, oh, this is the most powerful person by this much and that much. Okay, so let's do on the next page, we're going to calculate for the same weighted voting system. It's still 5, 4, 2, 1, 1. But now we're going to do the BPI. That's the Bonds-Off Power Index. It's the thing we did last time. Now, this is my mistake, but I accidentally copied and pasted this table again. But this table right here has nothing to do with this problem. So we need to get rid of this table. So cross it off. BPI has nothing to do with that table. What BPI has to do with is listing the players. So I'll name them again, P1 up to P4. And what we need to do is list all the winning coalitions. So let's scratch the idea that everybody's going to say yes to this ice cream motion. Now people have complete freedom to say yes or no. So the goal is to figure out how many different ways there are for people to say yes together. Let's start with the singletons. Is there any single person that can pass this motion alone? No. So I'm not going to list any of the singles. Now we'll go to the pairs of people. So we're going to list the pairs of people that could say yes and have enough to pass. For example, those two people right there, the last two people, is that enough if they both say yes? The answer is no. So I'm not going to bother listing those two people. They don't win by themselves. So we very, very carefully list all the winning possibilities. So for example, P1 with P2, and then P1 and P3. Okay, so let's pause right here and see if there are any other doubles. So are there any other pairs of people that have enough to pass this motion? The answer is no. Again, I don't think it's hard what we're doing, but it's just a lot of details, a lot of little numbers to keep track of in your mind. If you're having trouble listing these things in some organized fashion, if you go back to page 3, you will find right here a list of all the coalitions with 4 people. So these are the singles. Here are all the pairs. Here are all the trios. And then finally, there's one quad where they all say yes. And so what you can do if you're having trouble coming up with some organized way to list these things is you can just go through this. All right, are there any singles that were going to pass this motion by themselves? No. And then you just run through these guys one at a time. And you look at P1 and P2. Did they have enough in this example to pass the thing? Yes, so we list them. And then P1 and P3, they did. And we listed them, and P1 and P4, and we list them. But then we look at P2 and P3, and it turns out they don't have enough. So we don't bother listing them. But if you run through this page, you're never going to miss one, right? They're all here. It's just a matter of very carefully being very detail oriented and just run through one at a time and figure out which ones are enough to pass. And in terms of the trios, I've got the 4 of them listed here. What I'd like you guys to do right now in your groups is just one row at a time, see which of these trios have enough votes to pass this motion. And then whichever ones do, you write them down, and then we'll come back together and talk about the critical players. Okay, so I've got my list of all the winning coalitions up here, so just double check me. I think that all the trios passed the thing except for the last trio on the list. P2, P3, and P4 don't have enough votes together to pass it. So I've got 3 pairs of people, 3 trios of people, and then the one grand coalition where everybody says yes to the ice cream party. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to circle the critical players. This is the hard part from last class. It has nothing to do with this idea of pivoting that we talked about today. It's really tricky now because we had the tricky concept of critical player, and now we also have a tricky concept of pivotal player, and they really are separate concepts, and we just need to keep them apart in our minds. Certainly on the test, I'm going to ask you to do one of each. I'm going to ask you to do the critical player like we're about to do, and I'll also ask you to do the pivotal player on the same set of numbers. Okay, so here's what we do. Temporarily, to find the critical players, we temporarily cross off one person at a time and decide whether or not the winning coalition stays winning if they go away. So I'll just cross off P1 here. Does P2 have enough votes by herself to pass this thing? The answer is no. So is P1 critical? Yes. So I'm going to circle P1 because without them, this coalition is a loser. And then we come back over here and we try the same game with P2. So we will temporarily cross off P2. Patty? Mm-hmm. What do we think about Patty's argument there? Is P1 going to get circled in every single one of these? Yeah, I think that's a really nice time saver. This is actually a vocabulary word. P1 is said to have something. Is it a dictatorship? It's veto power. Dictatorship means that one person has enough to pass the motion. Does P1 have enough votes to pass the motion? No. But to have veto power means you are needed in order to pass the motion. You can't do it by yourself, but if you decide to say no, that thing is going to get struck down. And I think Patty makes a really nice observation. If we look at everybody else together, for example, these last three people, did they have enough to do it without P1? And the answer is no. So every time I cross off P1, it's going to lose because P1 is needed. Yeah, if P1 had 5 votes or 6 votes, then that would be a dictator. So P1 has veto power. In fact, they get circled every single time. So that's a really nice observation. You can write it down and you can try to apply it to homework problems or to the test problem. It's okay if you don't write it down and you go through what we were going to, where you just cross off every person each time. But 19 what? Yeah, but the denominator, I don't know what it is yet because it's only out of how many people get circled. So the denominator isn't going to be 19. It's going to be however many circles are up here. So I have to do that last. Okay, so let's cross off P2 temporarily. I'm trying to figure out if P2 was really important. Were they critical in that coalition? Does P1 have enough without P2 in there? No. So is P1 critical? Yes, because without P2, it loses. So we circle P2. Now you guys are going to have to do the rest of these, but let me just go to one more spot. Let's look at this row right here. This one with the arrow next to it. Yeah, the 1, 2, 4. So I'm going to look at P4 and ask if they're critical. I'm going to temporarily cross off P4. How many votes do these other folks have without P4? 6. Is that enough? Right. So is P4 critical? No. So we don't need P4 in that case. So you wouldn't circle it. So maybe go back to the pairs because we didn't finish the pairs. Every single row, every single person needs to get temporarily crossed off. P2 would be critical in that one, yeah. Okay, so very carefully go through, circle one at a time, check with your neighbors, and then make the fractions. So can you guys help me fill in the rest? In terms of the pairs, is P3 circled in this one? Yep, 3 and 4 both circled, so everybody's important in the pairs. How about in the first trio? Is P2 important? They're not. This coalition wins even if you take away P2's votes. Now, it's real common, this is a common misconception, is to say, okay, I can take away P2, and this is still enough votes to win, but then if you take away P3, it's not enough votes to win. And we're not allowed to do that when we're talking critical player. You only look at one person, you temporarily cross them off, you decide whether or not they were important, then you bring them back, and then you go to the next person. But we never get to keep crossing off multiple people. So I think in this case, if we cross off P2, how many votes do we still have left? We have 5. Is P2 critical? No, because we win without them. So don't even bother circling them. And the same thing happens. We can do without P3. So P3 isn't critical. What about in here? Are either of these folks critical? Yeah, so P2 and P4, I think that we can do without either of them. How about in the last one? And the last one is a no. And then over here, nobody's critical, except for the first person that we circled. So again, this is the hardest part of this calculation, is this one at a time, every person deciding whether or not they are critical. Now, I know that some people in this room get it. They can figure out whether or not someone's critical by looking at the numbers. And I know some people in this room aren't there yet, but get there. You have time to get there, but really just keep pushing yourself until you get there. Right? It's not a hard calculation once you get it. But until you get it, it's just like this blur of numbers that sometimes it's a yes, sometimes it's a no. So just be patient. And then finally, every single one of these we do is a fraction as an answer. So we'll list our fractions here. Okay, how many times was P1 critical? 7 times. P2, 1, P3, 1, P4, 1. And now we get to Patty's question. Patty had wanted to divide by, I think, 19 before, because that's how many people. That's right. So we divide by however many people, not how many people appear, but how many people are circled. So in this case, it's 10 critical players. So what percentage of the power does the first player have? 70%, 7 out of 10. And the other 3 folks, 10%. So look, this is the same game that we just played, but we calculated differently when we did the pivotal players. So remember, this is 70 and then 10s. And then down here, it's the same numbers, but a different calculation. It was 75 and then 8s. So if we do the pivotal player way, turns out player 1 gains a little more power, and the other 3 players suffer a little bit, versus what we just looked at where it was a 70, 10, 10, and 10. So you're not going to get the same numbers when we do these 2 different calculations. But one thing that I think is nice to see is consistent is that in this case, players 2, 3, and 4 are all equal, yes? 8, 8, and 8. And in the next case, they're all equal again, slightly different numbers, but still equal to each other. All right. Any questions on that? Okay. So let's go to number 10. Laura, you read already, didn't you? Yeah. Haley, can you read 10, please? Haley, can you read number 10, please?
Computing the UPI and SSPI by hand is very time-consuming and requires research.
Okay, that's good. All right, so there is a web page that you can just type in, and it will bring you right here. So I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger. Yeah, that looks better. Okay, so here's what you do. You get this blank table. You can see up at the top are 2 new favorite ideas. That's the Bonzoff index and the Shapley-Shubik index. Yes, Grace? No, they're really different calculations, and it's a good question. So let's make sure we're clear on this. The Shapley one is the one that we did today. This is the Shapley one, where you look at the pivotal player, assuming everybody's going to say yes. The Bonzoff one is really different. We didn't look at all the possible orders. We just said, how can people band together and have enough votes to pass the thing? If P1 and P2 work together, it will pass. But notice that we didn't also write P2, P1, because we don't care about the order in this case. And we did list just the ways that there are for the motion to pass. We do singles, doubles, trios, quadruples, and then we play this really challenging game with the like temporarily crossing off one person and seeing if they're critical. So it was really a different calculation. This is the Bonzoff one. The other one is the Shapley-Shubik. Okay. So let's come back to this web page. So here's what you do. It says there's a button here for add row. How many players did we have in this example? It was 4, right? So I'm just going to hit that button 4 times, and then I'm not going to even bother typing in the player name, but I am going to put the weight. So how many votes did the first person have? It was 4, and then down here was 2, 1, and 1. Okay, that's fine. And then what we're going to do is hit this. Oh, we also need the quota. So what was the quota in this case? It was 5. Something funny happened. That's a 1. And I thought we went down here and typed in the quota is 5. All right, so the numbers are going to be right up there. I'm going to make it bigger in just a second, but I want to make it smaller first so you can see how long this takes. Okay, so it's going to fill in the percentages that we just found, 3, 2, 1. All right, 70%. So now I'll make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see in the back. Do you see it? I don't know about that. So you can, I can't make the numbers any bigger, I'm sorry. But suffice it to say that it says 70%, 10%, 10%, 10%, just like we got, and it gives you the fractions on the right-hand side. Now that's the Bonzoff one. The Shapley-Shubik one, we didn't see it, but it already did it for us. So when I hit that word compute, and it says exactly what we said, 75%, 8.3, 8.3, 8.3, and it gives you the fractions over here, 18 out of 24, etc. And so the nice thing here is that you can play this game even with a few more people. So let's add a few more rows, and we'll just make up an example. So let's say that this person has 10 votes, and then this person has 8 and 6 and 2, and we'll give that one a 1. And then I'm going to make the quota. I don't know. Let's make the quota 23. Just making up a number, 23. Now, how many players did I have in this example? There's 9. Let me actually add one more because we did 10 factorial before. I'll make this person a 3. So now we have 10 players. How many different sequential coalitions are there if we look at all the ways to rearrange 10 players in a photograph? Was that 3.5 million, right? So this is going to go through 3.5 million calculations. You saw how long it took us to do the 24. It's going to do 3.5 million. So the question is, you know, like, is it going to take a minute? Is it going to take a few seconds? Is it going to be like Alex did with snapping the fingers? Okay, so let's hit this button. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so there's the 3.5 million. You probably can't see it in the back, but that is the number that Micah read to us before, and it tells us exactly how many times each person is critical or pivotal in this case, and then I can see the power distributions right here. 10%, 4%, 2%, 30% for that guy right there. So again, the idea is not that we're going to sit here and do 3.5 million things, but if we understand how it works with 4 people, then we can appreciate letting the technology help us, and then we can look at the numbers and say, oh, that person has too much power. This is not a fair system. And over here, the bonds-off calculation is also done. There were 928 different coalitions in this case. Singles, doubles, triples, quadruples, quintuples. Okay, another nice thing about this web page is that there's actually a few pre-built-in sets of numbers here. So some of you actually may end up doing a project on the UN Security Council. So there's good information here about how powerful. There's different kinds of countries represented in the UN Security Council. There are permanent members and there are temporary members, and they have a very different number of votes, permanents versus the temporaries. So you can play a game there. I'm just going to pull up the Electoral College numbers here. Now this is from the year 2000. So the numbers actually have changed because in 2010 we had our census, and so if you look for Massachusetts, you see us right there. We had 12. Do you know how many we have now? We have 11. So the numbers have changed just a little bit. But can you imagine, and you know, California at the top with 55, and then some of the real small or least populated states, and Washington, D.C. down here with only 3. So if you have 50 people, actually 51 because of DC, 51 people lined up and you want to rearrange them in every possible order, it's just some like enormous number, right? Can your calculator, somebody with the factorial button, can your calculator do 51 exclamation point? 8066, that was what I was waiting for. So what that means is that it's times 10 to the 66th. So we're not talking billions or trillions or quadrillions or quintillions. I think the biggest number we looked at together was a quintillion. That was with 18 zeros. This one has 66 zeros sitting at the end of it. Okay, so let's see how long it takes for it to do this calculation with a number that is 66 digits long. All right, we're going to hit compute. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so it actually did take like a split second longer than the first one that we did. And so here is how the power was distributed back in the year 2000. And so you can go up and look at California. They have 55 votes. Turns out they have about 11% of the power. In terms of the Electoral College, California represents 11% of the power. Is it fair? I don't know. I'm not judging, but it's good to know. Like, I can deal with 11%. And then you can see Texas here had 34 votes. They had about 6.5% of the power. I don't know if you remember, but Texas actually gained, do you recall how many electoral votes? They had 34. They gained 4 more. This wasn't even just like a go up by 1. Texas went from 34 to 38. So their power is much bigger now than it was in this picture right here. You can see Massachusetts had about 2.2% of the power, which actually I feel like kind of makes this average, because if there are 50 states and everybody has the same amount of power, then what percentage does each state have? 2%, right? 100 divided by the 50 states. Everybody would have 2 if it was all equal. Okay, so Massachusetts basically had 2.2%, but now we have 11 votes. And so I feel like we're right there now at 2%, right kind of at the average, not strong, not weak, right smack dab in the middle. Okay, and then that's the bonds off, and then over here, that was the Shapley-Cubic, and the bonds off, we can hit compute, and it does ridiculous calculations again, and gives us slightly different but similar numbers. All right, any questions on any of that stuff? Mike? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. It might seem to be, so what I hear Mike saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it seemed a little bit artificial to have the same three people voting over and over and over again, but just by changing the order. And that's a fair assessment. It's totally fine to say, you know, I don't really buy that that's a reasonable way to decide who's powerful, because these three people aren't going to vote in every single order. They're just going to vote yes or no, and just once, and that's it. Anyway, these two people, Shapley and Chubik, decided that they thought that was a reasonable way to assess power, and it's perfectly fine to think that it doesn't really jive with you. I don't have a sense of like which one of these is used more, you know, like outside of a math class. What I feel is that it's important to recognize that there are two different ways, two different famous ways to measure power, and they give you slightly different numbers. And I'm not judging which one is more fair. I'm just saying they give you different numbers, so we should have a sense that there are these different ways to think about power. If you were a spin person, where you tried to, you know, get the best outcome for you, if you're California, you would look at both sets of numbers and then choose the one that makes you look better, right? So there's always the danger in things getting spun. If I hear a news report, California has 11% of the power, okay, now that I know there's two different ways to measure power, I have a question. Which way did you use, right? So I'm not saying which one is better, but it's good for us to know there's more than one way, which makes it dangerous because then there's that opportunity to spin. Good question. Gina, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say if it seems to make sense to switch around how
Mhm.
that's what I thought. Why they
Yeah, nope, that seems reasonable. Okay, so let's spend a few minutes talking a bit about the projects. So if we come down here, so this is the bottom of page 12. So let me also actually pull up packet number 1, because that has all the information about the projects. So where is that? Here. And I will say, not to make anybody feel bad, but there's actually at least one person in here who has finished the first project. So don't feel like you need to wait until the day before it's due. Pick a time that's good for you. The semester has ebbs and flows, and there's going to be times where you're really busy and other times where there's kind of a lull. Find one of those times where there's a lull in the next few weeks and see if you can put some time into this project. Okay, so this is page number 40. All right, table in the back, let's come on up here. So this is page 40 of the first packet. It's where we have the general information about the projects. If you want to know how long it's supposed to be, it's in here. If you want to know how many sources you need to find, it's in here. All of the expectations are in here. Again, we're not going to spend our time together reading through this thing, but you should read through it if you haven't yet. A lot of good information here. And then if you go a few pages down the road, you will find a list of suggested topics. Starts on page 42 of the first packet. So there's this thing about putting numbers in perspective. You can read what it has to do with. And then every other suggested topic here has to do with voting, because that was our main topic for the first third of this course. You have some research papers on different voting methods. You can talk about a recent mayoral election in Burlington, Vermont. You can write an editorial to your local paper trying to convince them about the pros and cons of instant runoff voting, which we call plurality with elimination. So you've seen that method before. You can write about the UN Security Council. We just talked about that a few minutes ago. You can talk about the 2000 election between Bush and Gore, what went wrong with that election. And again, not judging like politically, not judging the outcome per se, but just there were some fundamental flaws that were uncovered in that election. Our voting systems were fundamentally flawed, and it all came to the forefront with that election. Number 9 is quite popular, conducting your own election. If you decide to do that, I'd be happy to give you like 60 seconds in class at some point to pass out your own ballots and have the people in this room vote on whatever question you come up with. And then some stuff about the Electoral College. So lots and lots of different forms that the project can take. Are there any questions on any of that? Okay, and right now I think Patty is counting, because the conducting your own election, you need to find at least 20 voters. So if we're a little bit shy on the day you poll, just go out in the hallway and find a few more people to.
to do that.
Mhm. You come up with your own question, and it says rank these things from your favorite to your least favorite, and it just, you come up with the question, you come up with the choices, you make the ballots, and assign them. Make a preference schedule, and then find the winner using all 4 of our different voting methods. Okay, so that is that. We come back here. So do we have any other general questions about projects at this point? At number 9, yeah, number 9 has, there's no concern about plagiarism because you are doing your own original research. So if you conduct your election, you're not citing any sources, you are creating original research. When you say using the text from the book. Right. So right now, I trust that we know how to find the winner using 4 different methods. You don't need to cite our book. It's in it's common knowledge now. We'll say that's why you don't need to cite it. Yeah. But if you do pull a quote from the book, then yeah, you should cite it. Okay. So that is that. Right. Okay. So different forms we talked about. So it could be a research project, could be making your own election. Could be an editorial to the paper. There are a few different forms that it could take. They're all written forms. There's no presentations that are going to come out of this. So if you do end up doing a research paper, you need to cite your sources. There's information in packet 1 about exactly how to cite your sources. But why should you cite your sources? Well, there are a lot of reasons why you should cite them. Number 1, you want to show respect to the people that did the work that you're citing. You don't want to take credit for somebody else's work, so show them respect. You need to be honest. If you take a quotation from somewhere else and you don't cite it, then you are lying by putting it in your paper and putting your name on it. Using other people's sources lends support to your argument. If you have some basic thesis you're trying to get across, you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. If some other people have done some work on this, you can grab the results from them and bring them into your paper to lend support to your argument. And you also need to protect yourself because, again, if you claim something as your own and I find out it's not your own, you're going to be in trouble. And so it's for your own protection that you cite your sources. Okay, and then just a few words about plagiarism. What is plagiarism? Taking of someone else's work, great. Taking credit. Other thoughts on plagiarism? Okay, there's a lot of good information on plagiarism in the plagiarism packet. We handed that out a few classes ago. I do have extras if you don't have one. And the key things to know to avoid plagiarism. So does anybody have that packet handy, just the plagiarism one? Right back here. Thank you. Okay, so. And again, if you don't have one, I have extras. If not here, then I have them in my office. All right, so at the risk of, I don't mean to insult anybody with this flow chart, but I like to keep things simple. And so this flow chart is a very simple way for me to understand whether or not I need to cite something. So again, if you don't have it in front of you, it's okay. But it basically just says, are you using somebody else's words? If you're using somebody else's words, what do you need to do? You need to cite it. It is clear. Suppose that you take somebody else's idea, but then you kind of paraphrase it. You put it into your own words. Do you need to cite that? It's somebody else's idea. You do need to cite it. Even if you give a summary of some other source, you need to cite, okay? The things that you don't need to cite, they basically come in 2 forms. Stuff that you figured out for yourself, you don't need to cite it. Like if you do your own election, that's your research, you don't need to cite it. Stuff that's common knowledge. Patty had said, do we need to cite the textbook when we find the winner using all 4 of those methods? I'm going to say no. It's common knowledge. Okay, that's kind of a stretch in terms of saying common. Like I wouldn't say that I expect every person in the US to know what plurality with elimination is, but it's out there. It's not something that the authors of this book invented. It's common, right? Okay, so there's a nice little flow chart kind of help you and lots of good information about plagiarism. All right, so we're going to hand out the tests for good now, and I'm happy to talk about them if people want to talk about them. I do. You have to follow me to my office right after class. Okay.
Forget your stuff here.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess we'll end a little early today. Don't say I never do nothing for you guys. See you on Tuesday. Okay. Gary, Jim, Alex. Alex, you wrote something funny. What did you write in here?
I wrote something funny.
Yeah.
I don't think it was me.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah, I thought about that when I was like, oh, I was like, oh, I'd probably read that.
It's a little drastic.
Well, you just forgot a zero. It was 6,000 is what you had meant to put. I cannot, but you can do whatever you want with it. You can do whatever you want with it. Bye. Excuse me.
You know, whatever works.
There you go. See ya.